Good evening. Welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Canada Day was an incredible opportunity to celebrate Canada, but also to think about where we are as a nation. And I think that we've got to have some sobering thoughts about where we are as a nation today and give some thought to where we want to go. And I do think that we need a new vision for Canada in this decade, in the next century, because I worry that we've lost our way. Canada has an incredible amount of promise. We've got an unbelievable amount of natural resources, natural benefits in our landmass, in our natural resources, in our fresh water, in our proximity to the biggest market in the world, the United States, to being separated from the rest of the world, other than the United States, by three oceans: the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic. We've got a huge benefit in our Arctic lands, our huge amount of landmass, our beauty in our geography and our topography, and we got a beautiful, wonderful population, a people that have come from three or four different places. Our francophone influence, our indigenous beginning. The immigrants from the British Isles and elsewhere that have come to this country, and then the immigrants that have come from everywhere else around the world to this country, both a long time ago as well as recently. So we've got, huge benefits. But we seem to have squandered them, or as some people have said, because of these benefits, we've become maybe complacent. And we've got, some real issues. And I think we need to sit back and really contemplate what we've done with our natural benefits and resources and how we have potentially squandered them and why we're in such a almost dismal, but certainly negative situation today. And so let me explain that if I could. Our productivity is, many people think, 30 to 40% below the United States. Our prosperity is 30 to 40% below the United States, where our median income is significantly below the United States. But 8 to 10 years ago, we were effectively equivalent. So what's happened over the course of the last decade? Real disposable incomes, on average, in median, haven't grown in, some people think, 8, 10, 15 years. The biggest growth in employment has been in the public service. The CRA has more people than national defense or than our military. Our taxation is very high, the highest it's ever been. We don't seem to have the educational capabilities and the educational institutions that we've had in the past. Our healthcare is not that wonderful benefit and resource that we've bragged about and thought that we had in the past. Waiting times are inordinate. People that are left in emergency rooms and or can't get even in the emergency rooms for an inordinate amount of time. The wait to get surgeries. We've all experienced this. Our debt, our deficits are at all-time highs. Our country appears to be divided in so many ways, between left and right federally, but also between east and west and central and the edges. Between still English and French. We still have reconciliation with our indigenous founding people. Our infrastructure is old and unfunded and breaking down. Congestion in the Toronto area and Vancouver is abysmal. And housing prices have grown at 2 to 3 times median incomes, such that we have a housing crisis today that the vast majority of young people in major cities have no hope of being able to afford home ownership, unless it's a small 500 or square foot or less condominium, certainly not a single family home with a backyard that may have been the dream at one point in time. What's gone wrong? I've had too many interviews with too many people that have talked about red tape and regulation. that it takes, 15 years to get a mine approved or an oil and gas development approved or a pipeline approved, that takes, 5 to 7 years to get a building development approved. And red tape and regulation seemingly everywhere in our economy, and that the CRA has more people than our Canadian military. What is going wrong? Why do we have this desire, this need to overregulate absolutely everything, to add red tape to everything? And then, too often we challenge politicians in this regard, and they think they can't change it. They can't become more efficient. They can't make things more streamlined. They can't become effective, efficient, rational. In business, you would be forced to do those things. For some reason, we outsource so many things to consultants and spend millions and millions and millions of dollars. And yet even that doesn't help. I worry that we don't have a growth agenda, a prosperity agenda, a productivity agenda. We just want to redistribute. We want to tax, divide out the pie, and redistribute it to people rather than grow the economy. And we haven't been growing the economy of late. We're foundering at either recession levels or darn close to it. Why did we get in this malaise? Why did we get in this attitude that all we can do is regulate and add in more red tape and add in more civil servants and lose this entrepreneurial zeal, that productivity zeal, this desire to innovate that I think we once had? And I'm not, make America great again, kind of harboring back to the 1950s and the 1960s. But I do think that, in the 1990s, after we had the big scare of downgrading of our debt, and that we had a debt crisis, some people called it the Canadian peso crisis, currency crisis. We got our act together and we got our government finances in shape. In the late 1980s, we were challenged from an economic standpoint how we were going to grow. And we had a federal election on the free trade agreement. And we made, after a great discussion, probably the most forward-thinking economic radical decision of Canada's lifetime, other than, frankly, the birth of Canada not becoming part of the United States. And we decided to enter into a free trade agreement with the United States. And it was a radical, brave agreement. Now many people say we have more freer trade between Canada and the United States than we do between Canadian provinces, that the barriers, the tariff barriers, the non-tariff barriers, the red tape and regulation that exist between provinces say we don't actually have free trade within and amongst Canadian provinces. We put huge subsidies out to foreign companies that come and want to put in EV battery production or electronic car production or different manufacturing facilities. But we don't seem to do the right things in regards to keeping good, innovative Canadian companies at home and incubating them and developing them and assisting them in their growth. We want to tax them so very quickly. We want to regulate them so very harshly. And our capital market system seemingly is pretty good for resource companies, but everyone tells me, and I've experienced it myself, if you want to go get money in the pharmaceutical and the biotech and the alternative energy business, you go to the US. Because for some reason our Canadian capital market structure, other than maybe in oil and gas, where we have flow through shares, overtaxes a lot of our investment opportunities, overregulates them, and we force them into the United States marketplace. Some critics have said that part of the problem is that we have career politicians that don't have Bay Street or Main Street or business experience or financial experience. I think that's part of it. I think that in the past, we've usually had a partnership in our federal government or in the cabinet of strong political people with strong business people. And I think of Jim Flaherty that worked with Stephen Harper, and I think of Paul Martin that worked with Jean Chrétien. I think of John Turner, who actually had a Bay Street career and obviously worked with Pierre Trudeau, but also Walter Gordon, who worked with Lester Pearson and with Pierre Trudeau and Winters. We don't seem to have that anymore, do we? We have these career politicians that are non-business oriented, non-economically oriented, seemingly legal or otherwise experienced or maybe they've just been in politics their whole career. In the United States, there seems to be a little bit more back and forth between the private sector and the public sector. We don't seem to have that in Canada. I interviewed a gentleman that runs a governance institute that talked about we needed a chief operating officer in every single one of our departments, ministries, because he seemed to think that ministries just couldn't get things done, that they were good at doing papers, but not actually implementing change and getting things done. And too often we ended up having to hire consultants at outrageous amounts of millions of dollars, and still all they did was prepare reports and not get things done. We have an educational system that I thought used to be world class, that most people today would not think is world class. We had a healthcare system that we bragged, we thought was so superior to the United States, and now wait lists and innovative products that are launched in the United States, not launched in Canada. And emergency rooms, et cetera, that all of us see challenges with. And we have this coming tsunami of baby boomers that are going to be entering their senior years and are going to be entering their very senior years, where our over 80 population is going to grow exponentially. And how are we going to take care of them all with pensions and healthcare and long-term care? I really worry for Canada. And this housing crisis, where we have this intergenerational transfer of wealth, really, to older people. And the only reason why is because we bid up their pricing so dramatically by restricting the supply of housing so incredibly, such that the net worth of homeowners has gone up dramatically. And when you think about it, housing should sort of go up with inflation or GDP. There's no reason why we shouldn't be building housing as quickly as the population grows. And so other than maybe, waterfront housing or proximity to downtown or something where you could argue location bids the value of real estate up. We've got so much land. We've got so much capacity. One would think we should be able to have housing as a commodity, not as an investment. But it's been this incredible investment where values have gone up 2 to 3 times what the median income has been. So number one, there's been a huge amount of net worth created by homeowners, but the balance of the population have been starved of the opportunity for home ownership and are facing a situation where, instead of it taking 3 to 5 years to afford a house, it's taking like 20 years to afford a down payment for a house. Thinking about a mortgage that was 3 to 5 times your income. Now you're thinking about a mortgage that is multiples of that, of your income. And many people thinking unless they, win the lottery or get a huge amount of money from somewhere else, they're not going to be able to afford a single family home. Why did we get this? NIMBYism, people say. Red tape and regulation, people say. Some people think it's because of Airbnb or foreign ownership or vacant houses. I think at the margin, some of that might be true, but that's a very small amount of the impact. I think it's lack of supply, and it's caused by municipal governments. It's caused by zoning. It's caused by lack of attention to this issue. And I think it's a real problem. So what do we do about this problem? I'm going to take a break and come back and give you some suggestions. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've just run through sort of my assessment as I've sat this weekend, the Canada Day weekend, thinking about some of the challenges we've got in Canada, about what those problems are. And I've tried to run through some of these issues. And I think you could probably add climate change to that list of issues. And clearly, you know, we've been addressing or trying to address some of those problems. I think that you know, the separation of East and West and North and South and rich versus poor and urban versus rural, all those divides would be added to that list. I think that geopolitical issues that we're not prepared for, the lack of funding the military and not living up to our NATO obligations are clearly part of that issue. I think that homelessness is a major issue. Poverty is an issue. And I wonder why we've been talking about this for my whole lifetime and we haven't seemingly been able to do much, if anything, about that. If not, frankly, things have gotten worse. And we could go on. And what is the solution is the major question. And I think the only solution that has been proven over and over again in history, and we've really seen in the last while with more people exiting poverty globally than we've ever experienced in history, is economic growth. We have to have economic growth. That is the only answer. And economic growth has to come from innovation, investment, and productivity. And all those lead to prosperity. And we've forgotten that maybe. Our GDP growth has been dismal, anemic, non-existent. Our incomes have been flatlined. We can't have a great society with that kind of result. And so how do we kickstart our economy? I think there's three things that we need to do. The first is I think we need to reduce taxation. And I think that we want people to make use of their extra funds that the reduction in taxation would create to invest in things, innovation, in companies, in prosperity, creating projects, not just in bidding up the price of real estate. And so we can't do this by way of lowering interest rates, though I think some lowering of interest rates is critical for increasing home affordability. But I worry that too much of a decrease in interest rates alone as a strategy, really what it does is it just bids up pricing and it doesn't solve the supply issue. So it solves the affordability, but it doesn't solve the supply, and people end up paying about the same amount of money because while their interest rates may go down, the prices go up. And so therefore, when you multiply the interest by the higher price, you may end up at a similar situation. So how do you get people to invest in productive opportunities? I think it is ways that create a better opportunity for business investment. And I worry that the capital gains tax higher inclusion rate, which increases the capital gains tax rate, longer term has a opposite impact to what we want. It decreases the interest in investment. And so we've got to find ways of increasing the interest in investment. And the capital gains really only applies at the end of an investment. I think the problem is at the beginning of the investment. And I think flow-through shares for resource companies work incredibly well. I think that income trusts used to work incredibly well. I think that accelerated depreciation works extremely well. I think that investment tax credits work well. I think what we need is a real thought to how do we get people to invest more in productive parts of the economy. And I think we need to therefore use some of those vehicles as a way of decreasing taxation, giving people more money in their pocketbooks so that they can hopefully invest more in productive parts in the economy, innovative parts of the economy. And as I mentioned, I think accelerated depreciation for investments is one of the best ways, which means that effectively you can deduct some of those investments that you're making on a quicker basis. And so therefore, arguably, the government is going to make the same amount of money, but it's going to take longer for the government to enjoy that tax. It's going to create more tax shelter earlier on for the investor. And so therefore, it's going to increase their IRR. It's going to increase their desire to make investments. I think flow through shares make a ton of sense. And I don't understand why we give people a deduction only when they're profitable. Why don't we give them a tax deduction, tax credit when they're just starting out? Because that's when they need the help the most. And so I think that flow through shares or the equivalent from a private standpoint, like an income trust or limited partnerships and other things where people get the opportunity to take the deduction against current income, makes a ton of sense. I think we need to have some people in Bay Street or the financial markets or business play a greater role in our parliamentary system, in our PMO, in our cabinet, to bring some of these ideas about prosperity, productivity, and economic growth to the decision makers. I think that too often our political system is such that it's very difficult to move between the business community and politics, and our leader-oriented parliamentary system, our electoral system, the power of the parties, the nomination process, all those things make it extremely difficult for business people that have got experience in meeting payroll and in creating innovation, getting involved in the political system. And I think that's a mistake. And I think we have been damaged because of that. And I think red tape and regulation is the number 2 restriction to innovation. When it takes 15 years to get a mine approved, I am not in a nanosecond suggesting that we approve things that are environmentally damaging, but we should be able to review things far, far more quickly. And the same thing with housing. It shouldn't take 3 times as long to push the paper around City Hall to assess whether a development makes sense as it does to actually build the thing. And so I think we need to dramatically reduce red tape, regulation. The civil service needs to become far more efficiency-oriented, effective-oriented, development-oriented, prosperity-oriented, rather than seemingly always wanting to stop development, stop progress, restrict, and regulate. We need to be more economic developmentally oriented, assistance-oriented, rather than trying to always stop, trying to always overregulate, trying to always dampen development. So taxation, reduction of taxation and incentives to innovate is number 1. And number 2 is dramatic reductions in regulation and red tape and restriction of the civil service. And the third thing, and I think this is probably pretty obvious, is I think we need fiscal sanity. I don't think we've had fiscal sanity. I think we've had budgets that have been spending too much money in just transfers rather than necessarily in productive means. We've given huge subsidies where we've tried to pick winners, and I'm not sure that's the right thing for governments to do. And those big subsidies got to be paid back, eventually through taxation. And I think we need to therefore have a very concerted effort at balancing our budget. I don't think that we have to go into surplus, but I think if we balance our budget and we grow our GDP, by definition, the deficit will go down as a percentage. The debt will go down as a percentage of GDP, and that's what we want over time. People that say we need to run surpluses and eliminate the debt, I think, are taking things to an extreme. No company would eliminate the debt completely, but if their debt as a percentage of total cap or their debt as a percentage of EBITDA was always going up, there would be some concerns. And so therefore, I think our debt as a percentage of GDP needs to stay flat, if not go down. And it needs to go down, particularly in good economic times, so that we do have some fiscal flexibility when we need it in tough economic times, a pandemic, a recession, a financial collapse, etc. So how are we going to achieve this? A massive reduction in taxation with corresponding incentives to take that money and invest it in productive parts of the economy, investment parts of the economy, to increase our investment in R&D, increase our investment in manufacturing, increase our investment in capital assets, increase our investment in things that will lead to more productivity and more prosperity. dramatic reductions in red tape and regulation, and in an attitude in the civil service that they want to stop things and change it to an orientation of move things forward. And then three, this incredible need that we have for a more sane fiscal environment. Those are some pretty massive changes to the way that we run our government. And I think we need to do it. And, some people have said that's fiscal conservatism. I think it's just rational fiscal responsibility. I don't think it's conservative or liberal. I think it's just rational fiscal responsibility. That's the way that you'd run a company. That's the way that you'd run, your house finances. That's the way we should be running our country. We can't just divide up the pie without growing the pie. We want a great healthcare system. If we want great infrastructure, if we want great educational system, if we want to solve the challenge that we've got of the coming tsunami of seniors, of elderly, and what are we going to do to support them in their old age after they've done what they've done to contribute to society over their lifetime? We need to get our fiscal house in order, and we're not doing it, and we haven't been doing it, and we desperately need to do it. The US is on fire from an economic standpoint. It's doing extremely well, and they actually run deficits greater than ours. For two reasons. Number one, of these Trump tax cuts that were dramatic a couple of years ago, and then the dramatic fiscal stimulus that Biden has put in place. And I think the difference there is that the fiscal stimulus, not everywhere, but primarily was spent in productivity enhancing ways rather than just in social transfers, and I think that is beneficial. But I'm worried that their fiscal situation is deteriorating fairly dramatically, and they're going to have to address it at some point in time in the future. Their growth right now is solving it. I think we need to seriously think about our vision for Canada and the type of people that we need to have in government, in parliament, in cabinet, in the PMO leading our country. I think we need more of a business orientation. I think we need people that have run companies. I think we need to have people that are economically oriented. I worry that too many people are just there for the job, just there for the political career, just there because of their pet desire, whether it be environmental or societal or whatever. And some of those people are critically important and capable and good and need to be there. But we need it balanced with some people that understand finance, understand economics, understand how to create innovation and create prosperity and create opportunity and build businesses that are going to pay taxes and cut red tape and have an orientation toward, why do we have to have all this red tape and regulation? Why does it take so long to review things and get approved? Why does the bureaucracy spend more time thinking about process and pushing paper instead of getting things done? I think we need some business people. That front page of the Toronto Star this past weekend was about all the things wrong with Toronto. Jennifer Keesmaat, the former City of Toronto chief planner, wrote a big tweet about all the things wrong with Canada, Ontario, and a lot of them, you take a look at them, are the fault of government. You take a look at the last Mississauga Mayoralty campaign, and almost every debate was opened up by the sponsors as, our taxes are too high, our housing is inaffordable, our crime is too high, we've got too much congestion. A lot of negativity, and justifiably so. A lot of criticism, and justifiably so. But yet, we keep on electing the same people. We kept on doing the same things. We don't seem capable of change. We don't seem capable of assessing our problems and thinking about what the solutions are. And we certainly don't seem capable of increasing our prosperity, which is, I think, the only way we're going to address any of these problems is by growing our prosperity, which allows us to, at lower tax rates, get more tax revenue, which allows us to spend more money on the things that are so important to us in our infrastructure, in our healthcare, in our education, in our other efforts of and obligations that the Canadian government has. And I really worry about, what happens if we actually slip into recession? What happens if we have to increase dramatically our military involvement in Eastern Europe or the Middle East, or God help us in Asia Pacific or the Arctic? What happens if we got hit by another pandemic? What happens if we don't have the capability of taking care of all these elderly people that are going to be this coming tsunami of baby boomers that are now, reaching senior ages, but in a few short years are going to be all over 80. And with longer lifespans, and yet the same retirement ages and time periods where you can start receiving pensions, they're going to be looking for funds. They're going to be looking for healthcare. They're going to be looking for someplace to live. And yet young people are going to be faced with a situation where they're paying the bill for this incredible debt, for these outrageously high housing prices, for all these seniors. They're going to be looking for healthcare and a place to live and pensions. Will there be civil strife? Will they say, we didn't sign up for this? The statistic I heard was that, a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, there were 5 working people for every 1 senior that was being supported by society. In 10 years, it's going to be 2 people working for every 1 person that is elderly, which means clearly that those 2 people, unless the seniors have funded their retirement, their healthcare, their long-term care ahead of time, it's going to be those young people. They're going to be paying all those expenses at the time where their taxation is already high and their housing is inaffordable. This doesn't add up. I do think that we've become complacent, and voting turnout says people just don't care because they don't think they can have a positive impact. And I really worry that Canada is not going to be the place that I love. It's not going to be the country that we all love. It's not going to have the economic opportunities that have attracted so many people worldwide to come here, that have kept us here. I worry that we're going to have brain drain to the United States. We already have it. We're having brain drain from Toronto and Ontario to Alberta, where people are going and looking for lower taxation and lower housing prices. I'm doing development work in Dallas, Texas, and the amount of people that are moving to Texas and Florida for lower taxation, lower red tape, faster approvals, the number of companies that are doing that. It's shocking, and it's scary, and it should make us wake up and do something. So Canada's got some huge opportunities and some huge benefits and great resources. But I think because of that, maybe we're like that trust fund kid that doesn't think we have to work too hard and becomes complacent and squanders the opportunity. And we need a whole new effort to build Canada the way that we dream it should be. I'm going to take a break and come back with a couple of final comments about the Canada I love that I wish we could improve. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Sagan and 60. I wanted to end by telling you all a little bit about my own experience because I think I've got a good view of Canada for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've lived across Canada, not in Atlantic Canada, but other than that, I've lived in Quebec and Montreal and Toronto and Ontario and in Markham and Mississauga and London, Ontario, and I've lived and worked in Vancouver, British Columbia. I've worked right across Canada because of several jobs that have taken me right across Canada, from a pharmaceutical company looking at pharmaceutical assets, from a beer company and a conglomerate looking at beer, at retail, at conglomerate investment opportunities. I was working for Jim Pattison on the West Coast, and I looked really in West Coast of British Columbia and the interior, and Alberta and British Columbia and Saskatchewan for resource investments, retail investments, media investments, etc. And then of late, I've been working for a real estate development company that have really taken me right across the country looking for real estate development opportunities, both in retail, office, industrial, and in multifamily residential. And so I've lived and worked across Canada. I also have had the opportunity of living and working in 3 cities in the United States, Boston, New York, Los Angeles, working a lot in Florida. When I worked for the Walt Disney Company in Los Angeles, I spent a fair amount of time in Southern California as well as Florida. I went across the United States looking at master plan communities, worked in Euro Disney in France with Molson's. When I worked for Molson's, I did a fair amount of work in Australia, New Zealand, and in London, England, as we were looking for acquisition opportunities and investment opportunities. I was hired by a private equity group to look for investment opportunities in Eastern Europe, and I spent some time there. So I've had the opportunity to live and work internationally, particularly in the United States, but work in Europe and Australasia. And what has that experience taught me and brought to me? Canada is a wonderful country. We've got great people. We've got great business opportunities. We've got innovative people. We've got ambitious people. We've got confident people. We've got beautiful topography. We've got great natural resources. We've got beautiful cities and towns and mountains and lakes. And I do think that that's wonderful, but it's also been a problem that we've had, because I do think that we've been complacent because of all that beauty, because of all that opportunity, because of all those natural resources that we've had that have brought in taxation money, have brought in profitability, have brought in great jobs, high-paying jobs, and we may not have had to have worked as hard as somewhere that didn't have those natural resources, and so therefore we became complacent. We need to buckle down. We need to think about what we need to do to produce an innovative, productive, prosperous economy. We need to grow like some of those countries that may not have the natural resources. You know, why has South Korea, why has Singapore been able to grow and have and establish disposable incomes that are the envy of the world without the natural resources? Japan without the natural resources. Because they're more innovative. They're more productive. They invest more of their savings in capital investment, R&D, productive investment opportunities, less in just appreciating real estate. We need to have people in Ottawa, people in our provincial and municipal governments, business leaders that talk about the vision for a more prosperous Canada, that we've got to drive GDP growth, that we've got to drive median disposable income, that we've got to drive innovation, we've got to drive productivity, we've got to drive prosperity, and thereby we can afford some of those social programs that we're all so proud of and happy to have. But by just splitting up the pie, we're not going to achieve what we want. We need to become far more growth-oriented, far more prosperity-oriented, and far less just redistributive-oriented. Canada is a great country, but because it's so great, I think we've rested on our laurels. We've been complacent. We haven't had to work as hard as we need to work. And we haven't driven our economy where it needs to go. We haven't built our economy the way it needs to be built. We haven't thought about fiscal stability the way we need to think about fiscal stability. We haven't invested in our people, in our companies, in our assets, in our natural resources, in our innovation, in our ideas, the way that we need to. And we need to think very aggressively about how do we change our trajectory. Because if we don't, I'm very worried about where Canada's going to go. You know, the statistic came that Canada has gone from equal to some of the most prosperous states in the United States to being equal to some of the least prosperous states in the United States from a prosperity standpoint, from a median income standpoint. That's not where I think we want to end up. So this Canada Day, I challenge you. Let's give some thought to how great Canada is, how wonderful it is, but how this may have actually produced some complacency, and that we need to get our act together to make it more prosperous for the benefit of all of us. Thanks. Good night, everybody.